which came out in the UK just a few months ago, Oliver Soden. Our wonderful filmmaker Barnaby Thompson. It's a great pleasure because it's such a busy Broadway season, and this man has given up his time to come and talk to these two gentlemen, the entertainment journalist from NY1, Frank.
What a film, right? What a life! Can you hear this song? So as we learned in this incredible documentary, congratulations, 50 plays, 9 musicals, poems, songs, you name it, he did it. Barnaby, I want to start with you. Where did this idea come from to capture Noel's life in film form?
Well, I've been a fan of Noel's work for quite a long time. I mean, at school we were taught Coward, but it felt very much of another time. And then I remember in 2001, I think I saw a production of Private Lives with Alan Rickman and Lindsay Duncan that just had a kind of sexiness and freshness and modernity to it that really made me sit up and sort of take notice in a way that I hadn't done before then. And then in 2008, I produced an adaptation of Easy Virtue with Jessica Biel and Kristen Scott Thomas and Colin Firth. And that was such a joy, and also just it sort of ground me into the Coward world. And I've always gone to Jamaica, so I was familiar with that world, which also fascinated me. So when Stanley Buchthal came to me with the idea of doing a documentary, it immediately caught my attention. But the thing that really made me think this is interesting and relevant to today is that he left school at 9 and came from a poor family. And you just go, whoa, wait a minute, because I imagine he went to Oxford and Cambridge, came from a good family, absolutely. And that really made me look at everything in a new way.
Absolutely. Oliver, your biography, we see it up there, Masquerade, The Lives of Noel Coward, the first real biography on him in 3 decades. Right?
Yeah, the last one was 1995.
Yes. So what made you want to jump into his life? What made you want to do that?
Well, I also saw that production of Private Lives with Lindsay Duncan and Alan Rickman, but I was 10 years old at the time, so it's more distant memory. And I have to say it was as crude as being asked to do it. Although it's 51 years tomorrow since Coward died, it's taken that long for things like the Official Secrets Act in the United Kingdom to not be valid on Coward's war work. It's taken that long for the archive to be entirely gathered. And it seemed time for a new biography. But my generation, I was born in 1990, we were not taught him at school. And when I did my English degree at Cambridge, I think and I hasten to add, I think this is quite wrong, but if I had said to my tutors there, I would like to do a dissertation on the plays of Noel Coward, I think they might have been a little snooty about that. So it seemed time not only to look at all the new material, but to look seriously at the texts and the plays, and to possibly not agree with Coward when he says that he was just a talent to amuse and he only cared about box office, but to actually look at the plays and make the argument that they're serious, lasting comedies for a new generation.
Prior to watching this film, when I think of Coward, or when I thought of Coward, I always thought, Private Lives, the plays. I went right to the plays, but, I learned so much watching your film. Who knew he reinvented himself in Las Vegas and was friends with Frank Sinatra and Zsa Zsa Gabor? I mean, it was amazing. What was the most fascinating thing you learned about Noel with doing this film?
Well, I think that first of all, the ups and downs of his life are pretty extraordinary. To find yourself at the age of 10, not at school, at the age of 20, setting off to New York with a one-way ticket, £17 in your pocket, at 30 to be the highest paid writer in the world, at 40 to be a spy, at 50 to be washed up and forgotten, and at 60 to be a star in America, but still not accepted by your country, and then finally at 70 to actually have everything come around. I mean, it's an extraordinary life.
How are you, Oliver?
I think it's two things that really surprised me, and one was just the range of the work and how little of it we know. We see that there are 50 plays, and we might know the 5 great comedies, but just to discover that there is a play Coward wrote in 1930 set in the trenches of the First World War called Post Mortem, or a play 5 years later called Point the Lane, where you would swear blind you were seeing a Tennessee Williams play 20 years before Tennessee Williams. That range of the work, of the stage work, was a huge surprise to me. Another play written after the war, we saw a picture of the flyer, imagining what had happened if the United Kingdom and the Allied powers had lost the war instead of won, and so on. And the other thing that surprised me, that I think the film captures too, is the sadness and the unhappiness. Because if you think of a great comedic playwright, you somehow assume they're going to be great wits and happy, sunny people. And the sadness of Coward, and the fact that an actress such as Elaine Stritch could say of him that he was the saddest person she'd ever met and ever known, that to me was a surprise.
He was like the ultimate multi-hyphenate before that was even a title, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Talk a little bit about diving into the archive, because I love the archival footage, especially him in Jamaica, the photos, just, with putting together a film. Obviously this was a time going by. You had to get creative with telling the story for film. What was that like for you?
Well, first of all, this will be hard to imagine. Any of you know Alan Brody, who is, a very glamorous figure. You imagine him operating in this glamorous Noel Coward world where you sort of move into this house and everything there is, it's not like that. The archive exists in a lockup in Acton, which is very cold and very dark. And you're sort of scratching around trying to find stuff. But we did, a lot of the film had been found, but we did find a few cans of film at the bottom of a box. And just going through, you'd pick up these boxes and you'd find he would write his plays, he'd write his plays in longhand, and they were written like without any crossings out. It would just, so there was some archive that was impossible to get into the film just because, the handwriting that you see in the film is his handwriting, but to get across that sort of the full extent of it was very hard. But the home movies are amazing. This guy who took up camera, in his 20s. So it meant that we had all that film of New York, which is, it looks like it's professionally done.
Yeah.
It's that's Coward. So it was incredible insight into his life and his travels. He went everywhere. He went, South America, North America, the Far East, Australia, Bali, Russia, China. And so for me, the putting together like that bit in Private Lives where he's talking about how I travel the world, which you kind of think of it as a throwaway thing. Well, Noel actually did it.
He did it.
And so there was a great joy in kind of matching up those moments to bits of stuff from that Noel himself had filmed.
I love the choice of using Alan Cumming to narrate and Rupert Everett to do the voice of Noel Coward. Obviously, Rupert Everett was on Broadway 15 years ago in Black Spirit. And, you think about Alan Cumming, he does cabaret, he does film, he does theater, he does TV, he does everything. What was that choice? Where did that choice come from?
Well, I'd worked with them both before. Alan was in a film I produced called Spice World with the Spice Girls. And Rupert, I made a lot of Oscar Wilde films with Rupert, like An Ideal Husband and The Importance of Being Earnest. But they're both in their own way modern. They're definitely, Alan comes from, the sort of Dundee, which is the northernmost part of Scotland, and has created a whole world for himself, very much in the sort of the Coward tradition. He's a writer, he's a singer, he's a multi-hyphenate himself. So, and Rupert as well, who's done all that. So it felt like, I was very keen as much as possible to tell the film in Noel's own words, and for it to be as it were, conveyed by people who are really made in his mould.
I think it's very clever that Rupert Everett doesn't do an impression of Noel Coward, because one thing this film tells you is that everybody has an impression of Noel Coward. And they are always, I think, camper and more effeminate than Coward actually was. He actually had a much gruffer voice than is usually done in the films of him, like Daniel Massey in the film Star about Gertrude Lawrence. So I think you get much closer to Coward for the fact that Rupert Everett just does it very simply, and I liked that when I saw it.
Oliver, I believe I read in an interview or heard on a podcast when you were talking about writing your book, 30 something years ago when the last biography came out, diving into Noel Coward's world of homosexuality was not really a thing, or was kind of touched on, and the biographer didn't really go deep into that. But with times changing and being in 2024, you were able to dive a little deeper into that, and that being part of his identity and part of his makeup. Can you just talk about that?
Yes, it's very interesting because the previous biography, 1995, I don't know how things were in America, but in England there was this thing called Section 28 forbidding the so-called promotion of homosexuality in schools, and it leads to a book that now, 3 decades on, reads as both tentative and tub-thumping, in that you couldn't go far enough, but you also had to go too far in a way. It's slightly, you can't do in 95 what you can do now, which is to just treat it as completely as normal. It needs no special treatment. Obviously you are writing about the plight, I think that is the right word, of the homosexual in the 20th century. It's illegal for all but the last 3 years of Coward's life. But you're also writing about Coward's sexuality. You're not writing about this amorphous, nebulous thing, as if there's one way of being homosexual in the century. You're talking about Coward's sexuality and emotional life, which is unique to him. I've written 2 books about gay men in the 20th century, and they are homosexual in completely different ways, and it was a completely different experience each time. So it allowed me, I think, that distance whereby you can make Coward's homosexuality at once utterly incidental to everything he wrote, everything he did, but also intrinsic, it's matter of fact. So it's a careful balancing act, but you have, I hope now, a free hand.
You also spoke about, having access to the wartime diaries, which was not a thing even 30 years ago, I believe. Just talk a little bit about what you discovered with that.
Well, that's rather lovely for me now, being in New York, because a lot of them were kept, visiting spy masters in the St. Regis Hotel and things like that. So it's nice for me to finally see these places. And I'm sure there are people here who have seen the published volume of the Noel Coward Diaries, which has a couple of pages at the front covering the years of the Second World War. But we now know, I have now seen in the storage unit in Acton that Barnaby and I know its unheated corridor as well. Coward kept a diary entry for almost every day of what he was doing, and we also now have and can publish the spy reports from that map you saw in the film of him travelling across America and sending back these reports to William Stevenson, who was the American arm of Special Operations Executive, which was the spy body Coward was working for. So just turning over in that archive, page after page, 11 a.m., St. Regis Hotel, meet X. And X is the biggest spy master in the Western Hemisphere. And being able to piece together England, Paris, New York, what he was doing, what he wanted to do, that's astonishing, and he was funding it too.
That's amazing. You must have been a kid in a candy shop having access to all of that.
It was a bit like that. But I still, Acton is nice, but Jamaica is nicer, and I haven't been there.
I love the choice of using all the archival interviews. Maggie Smith, we hear Lynn Redgrave, the late great Lynn Redgrave. What was the choice of that? Obviously, most of these folks are no longer with us, but going through and digging through and finding these old interviews.
I think that I wanted to immerse people in the time, and I think sometimes it can be jarring if you're coming out to sort of modern interviews, take you out of the world that you've spent a lot of time creating. So It was a kind of rule that I created for myself, that only use things from people of the time about that time, so as much as possible, it's not perfect. As much as possible, you feel like you're still in the moment as the century is unfolding.
I love it. Oliver, I think you had this in your book, this quote from T.S. Eliot, who said, "There are things you can learn from Noel Coward that you won't learn from Shakespeare." What has Noel Coward taught the both of you?
Give me some thinking time. You answer that.
Well, I think that the thing that really, the takeaway to me is when you see that list of the amount of work that he generated in his lifetime, that he wasn't, he did the hard yards, he had this he made everything seem like he'd thrown it together in 15 minutes, but the truth is everything was worked on, everything was thought through, and there's something I think very inspiring about that balance of hard work, making light of hard work. Seems to me to be a very good life lesson.
I think it was interesting because we were both of us working on our projects either during or just coming out of COVID and the pandemic. And I thought of Noel Coward coming out of the pandemic of the Spanish flu in 1918, which he got very, very badly, and putting the slaughter of the First World War behind him because he saw time in an army training camp, and being spat out into a new decade with a new generation trying to find new designs for living, new ways of life that are truthful and free, away from Victorian convention. And I value that about him, this hunt for a new way of living, whether it's with a member of your own sex or in a trio or whatever it might be. But he isn't as easy as just saying it's all free love and we're all artists and bohemian and it's lovely. He shows you how hard it is to live freely and truthfully. And that, I think, was what he taught me, the importance of making it new, but how hard it is to do that.
There was so much you packed into your documentary. What a full life. And there was, with an hour and 40 minutes, I think, is the running time. Obviously, stuff had to get left out. What got left out one thing that got left out that you wish you could have put in there?
Well, I mean, obviously there's an enormous amount of his work that just doesn't get mentioned, which I feel in a kind of, I'm somewhere and someone's going to punish me for that. And there were lots of stories. The Second World War, you could do a whole movie about the Second World War, because all that traveling around he did as a spy, he paid for himself, and then he went back to England. Churchill, I don't think, really ever liked the cut of his jib, and told him, you should just be a singer. But meanwhile, he was taken to court twice by the British government for spending money overseas during the war. So he found himself in court defending himself, unable to say he was being a spy. And he got fined for it. So there were lots of things like that where you go, oh, that's such a good story. But it felt like I wanted to tell the thing. I think there's a majesty to telling his life quickly. So there were certain escapades that one had to leave behind because it sort of slowed down the natural pace of it.
How about you, Oliver, with your book? Anything on the cutting room floor?
Yes, I would say, and in a way this was a purposeful decision. It's the famous funny lines, the quips, the legend, the myth, which are in a lot of other books if you want to find them, which he may have said or he may not have said. Because I just wanted to sort of leave that aside, the legend, the wicked wit of Noel Coward. I was more interested perhaps in the man, but of course every witticism is so perfectly honed, so finely formed that you regret sort of being suspicious about that one and not putting it in. Because in a way similar to Barnaby. I wanted it to be told in his own words, because why bother getting in the way when you have Noel Coward as your wordsmith? And I stuck as best I could to the things he'd done at the time, the letters, the diaries. But it does, of course, mean that everybody comes up and says, you didn't put in my famous story or my favourite line. But that was what I chose to lose in a way.
The thing in the end is he is unknowable, because he always was operating with a mask. He always was playing the role of Noel Coward, and there were so many moments where I just wanted to find just a way in. I didn't want to presume to make the case that he's this person or that person, but he was, although he was this incredible flamboyant figure that clearly took over any room that he walked into. There was this, there was secret Noel that I'm not sure we'll ever really know.
Yes, I always wanted to ask the question, and I felt it very strongly having seen a film where he's so often either in front of an audience or surrounded by friends, acolytes, people, admirers. What was he like when he was on his own? And I don't think either of us has an answer to that, because he didn't. There's a moment in that great play, Present Laughter, where just once in that entire play is Gary Essendine, whom we saw Peter O'Toole play in the film, left alone on the stage, and he doesn't know what the hell to do. And that's a key to Coward, because you peer into the room, and if he's on his own, who is he? What's he doing? Who is he being if he's not being Noel Coward?
Final question for you both, and we're going to go out on a limb here. The commercial theater has changed quite a lot since the days of Noel Coward. So with diving into his world, really getting to know Noel through his writings and films and theater work and all that good stuff, what do you think Noel Coward would say today about the commercial theater? What would his response be?
Well, I think Noel Coward made it part of his image and part of his business to be the witty curmudgeon, moaning in beautifully honed aphorisms and quips about whatever the theatre was doing if he wasn't at the centre of it. So I'm sure he'd say there weren't enough revivals of his own plays, first of all. But beyond that, it's very hard to sort of, I can't speak for Broadway, only London and the West End. You have to be very careful when talking about Coward's views today, whether you're talking about the young radical Coward of the 1920s, who I think would have been at the forefront post-COVID of pushing at the barrier, and the older Coward who wrote those Sunday Times articles and moaned about everything. And I think the older Coward would have felt that the theatre was going to the dogs, quite frankly. But I think key for him would be just how many Coward revivals are there?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that his view of the theatre in general would be much more benevolent as long as people were still seeing his plays. But I think certainly in terms of the London theatre, I'd like to think that he would continue to have been excited by it. And I think that there's a lot of great stuff that is going on enough. I mean, he would enjoy being scathing about the jukebox musicals. I mean, he would have a field day over, particularly the 26th movie gets turned into a musical. But I think that he would still be excited about the great new writing that continues.
Well, the great Mad About the Boy is out now. Thank you so much, Barnaby.
It's out on September 6th.
September 6th, where you guys get a sneak peek. And of course, Masquerade is out. You can buy in the lobby, correct?
It is. I think there's a copy or two out there.
Barnaby and Oliver, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.